We'll begin the webinar in just a minute. We'll give everyone a chance to log in. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Finding Opportunity in MRF Glass. My name is Mary Ann Remolador. I'm the Assistant Director of the Northeast Recycling Council, which is also known as NERC. We're delighted to host today's webinar and to be able to share information about MRF Glass resources, processing options, and end markets. Before I introduce the speakers, I just wanted to go over some basics with you. Everyone has been put on mute to keep the background noise down to a minimum. We welcome your questions throughout the webinar, and the way you would share your questions with us is to go to the chat box, which you can find in the right-hand side of your screen. There should be a box open there. If it's not open, you will see an orange arrow at the very top right corner of your screen. And if you click on that, it'll open up the box so that you can then put in your questions within that chat box. We also wanted to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, and the recording as well as the presentations will be available on NERC's website tomorrow. So for today's webinar, we have 4 speakers, and they include Eileen Bereni, who's the Principal of Governmental Advisory Associates. Then we have Ellen Martin, who's the VP of Impact and Reporting at Closed Loop Fund. Herb Northrup, the Chief Operating Officer of Aero Aggregates, and Brooke Nash, the Branch Chief of Waste Reduction Programs at the Mass DEP. So first we're going to hear from Eileen Bereni. And Eileen, I have shared my screen with you.
Okay. Okay, so as was just said, my name is Eileen Bereni. I'm a principal at Governmental Advisory Associates. We are a research and consulting firm that have been surveying MRFs since the 1990s. So just in terms of the way I'm going to present, I'm going to really pretty much set the scene and set an overview from about 10,000 feet and just discuss some of the highlights of the most recent survey that we completed of MRFs, which was 2016, and also then just look at specifically issues of glass recovery in terms of both nationally and also regionally. So just to indicate where most of the data that you're going to hear from and you're going to see on the screen basically comes from a variety of sources, but mainly telephone contacts with MRF operators, as well as annual reports from the various cities or authorities, budgets, financial studies, etc. And these results are actually published as a database that's available for purchase. So just in general, overview, developments affecting recycling. Right now, obviously the issue of markets and markets, and all about really China and national sort. I was just at a conference yesterday of alternative energy and waste processing, and pretty much the whole talk was on markets and the impact of the tremendous change in the Chinese purchase policy. And of course, in terms of, in addition, you've got pricing volatility in mixed fiber and OCC related in part to the Chinese markets, and also swings in plastics, which have been rebounding somewhat, but this puts tremendous financial pressure on MRF operators and their customers. And MRF operators are actually being forced then to build in market risks into their customer contracts, which is causing some degree of financial pain and budgetary issues with respect to local governments and authorities. Technology. So single stream MRFs are really pushing technology. Technology is being pushed in terms of sorting and more capital intensive sorting technology in terms of robots, artificial intelligence, new types of screens, separators. But the paradox right now is essentially that this technology is clearly supporting less sorting at the curb, while markets, on the other hand, are demanding a higher and higher quality product. So on the one hand, you've got technology, but that is outstripping to some degree the degree of quality that's being required in the marketplace. And it's also, you've got capital intensive machinery in a volatile market environment. So there's really two types of pressures that are being put on MRFs currently. Other challenges are that residential diversion has plateaued in the range of about 28% to 35% nationally. That it hasn't really shifted. High residue rates are plaguing MRFs. And in the midst of all this, the waste streams are changing, which as operators, many of you are confronting the multiple layer plastics, the Amazon and Blue Apron impact in terms of the different types of packaging, and the swamping really of some of the systems with OCC, some clean, some not so clean, is really impacting MRFs as well. Just to also look just in terms of definitions, in terms of what's a MRF, the boundaries are blurring between different types of facilities in terms of these hybrids with transfer station, facilities that are handling only dry commercial materials, mixed waste facilities, and then single material facilities that are handling fiber, maybe just fiber and plastics, or maybe just fiber and metals. most of the data that I'm going to be presenting is really going to be looking at the more traditional type of MRFs, which is multi-material MRFs and not the single material facilities. So what does a typical MRF look like? It's likely to be single stream. If it's a single stream residue rates, we're looking high rates now, between 20 to 30%, possibly more if glass is included. Above the 100 tons per day, the small facilities are essentially going away. There's been a number of MRF closures among small facilities and consolidations among the private companies that are involved with facilities. Much more mechanized and most likely to be owned and operated by a private firm. So just a couple of, these are just numbers. You're going to have this. I'm not going to really talk you through it. It's pretty obvious. I mean, the range of facilities in terms of these multi-material MRFs is in the range of about 500 over nationally. This is just looking at it by region. And the only interesting thing you can see, and I find it fascinating, is if you look starting in the early years, 91, et cetera, you see the Northeast really dominating. I mean, we were the leaders really in terms of these facilities and recycling. And as time has passed, you can see that other regions that we're not actually a little lower than but it is relatively distributed evenly. But the Northeast was clearly the leader initially. Average size is about 180 tons per day. The median is over 120 tons, and you'll see the slide there. And I just put in, these are just averages in terms of throughput, and I just put in the NERC state number. These are just looking at MRFs within the NERC states, and that's the 213 tons per day about on average.
And Eileen, can I just interject that?
Sure.
When Eileen says NERC states, she's referring to
the
11 Northeast states, which is Maine down to Maryland.
Right. Sorry about that. Annual throughput in terms of, this is just annually, the 2018, about 26 million tons. It's pretty much the same. I mean, it's gone down a bit, partially in terms of consolidation and some closures. Single stream is clearly the dominant system now, and this is just to show you what the change, how the change has occurred. Going back to, this is of all multi-material MRFs, about 15% in 2002, up to 70% now. So I mean, it is really the dominant system that we have. Whether that's going to stay or not, we'll see. Oops, sorry. Just thought this was sort of interesting if I break it down by region. The Northeast region is still on the lower end because when we first started, I mean, given that we were the leaders in building MRFs, we really started with mostly dual stream facilities. Slowly, that's been changing now, and a lot of these dual stream are flipping over to single stream, but we're still lagging in terms of other parts of the country. Just in terms of impact and just looking at things, looking at average throughput and also average residue rate, and these do not include glass. And you can see, I mean, the impact of single stream mostly on the residue rate, and of course also on the throughput in terms of average throughput of facilities. These are the single stream MRFs by nature are larger facilities, and they have a challenge with respect to residue rates. Level of technology is growing with respect to these facilities, and I just used optical sorters as one example in terms of the amount of facilities. There are over 182. There's probably more now that have or will be installing optical sorters. Now, these are usually for plastics. Interestingly, one of the first applications, or we saw in the Northeast, Rhode Island being one of them, basically had installed the optical sorters for glass and for glass color, but they were basically abandoned. Most of those were closed down. They were the early iterations of some of them worked, but also the expense of maintaining them with the value of glass just did not make financial sense. Current challenges to single stream, these are high cost facilities if you're to build from scratch. The high increase in residue rates and handling costs. The results have been really an increased emphasis in some cases on customer and consumer education, the tabling of additional equipment purchases, partially because of the financial strain. They've been cutting back on the types of materials taken, and I think that's going to be picked up by some of the other speakers, particularly plastics and glass. Going back to 1 and 2 plastics, and also pulling glass out of the program. And the sharing of market risks, the implementation of processing fees, which are averaging, oh gosh, they can go as high as $65 a ton, in the range of $35 to $45 a ton. Glass, so about 20% now, these MRFs are not taking glass as part of curbside. So in various, there are various options that have happened. They are offering separate drop-off location, or they're kept separate in the collection system, given the problematic markets in many areas. So, or it's dropped completely, and people are told to drop them off at their regular recycling facilities or their drop-off centers. Plastic bags continue to be a problem, and they're excluded in most cases, caps, rigids. But since we're not really talking about plastics, I won't spend any time. But aseptic packaging, interestingly enough, increased acceptance and taken in over 50% of facilities. Just looking at the percentage of MRFs that are now that are not taking glass as part of their regular collection program, you can see that in the Northeast it's few at this point. Although as we speak, some are dropping, but South, Midwest particularly have dropped, and I think there are interesting reasons why. So just looking at some of the markets, where the major markets for glass really are across these MRFs, the fiberglass and sandblasting, the bottle-to-bottle glass companies, alternative daily cover, which is a high percentage, aggregate and construction, intermediate processor. Some of these are hard to really classify, but intermediate processor, by that I would include strategic materials, which is the major, across most regions, it's the major taker of glass, mixed glass from MRFs. Other types of brokers, but it's really the ADC, and if you look at the intermediate processor, of which strategic is the major player, it's almost 50% is going to that, to those uses. So the glass market, I don't have to say, it's a very regional, local type market. So where the glass processor end user is located determines the ease of access by the MRF. So, I mean, in parts of the country, KC metro area, Ripple Glass, Momentum, which is Salt Lake City, and now the Front Range area of Colorado. The Arda Group, which was actually, it's still in Minnesota, it was in Massachusetts. And obviously, with that closure of the Massachusetts plant, the effects are really they go throughout the region, so that up into New Hampshire, you have cities that are dropping their glass programs. Massachusetts is confronting a crisis, and into parts of Connecticut and so forth. So the future is very murky right now. So Pace Glass is opening in New Jersey. That's going to be a very large plant, which theoretically will be taking mixed glass from facilities, although the nature of the quality that they're going to require, as well as what they would charge, is still up in the air. Efforts by the state of Massachusetts, which Brooke is going to be speaking to, I think, in terms of providing grants to have MRFs put in additional glass processing equipment. Sourcing, trying to find new outlets for glass, which we're also going to hear about, and emphasis on some of the other uses of glass, even to the extent of using it for alternative daily cover, which has, for landfills, which has its issues in the sense that in many cases that really isn't considered the best use or a recycling type use for the glass. I mean, some of the new single stream MRFs are putting in glass cleaning equipment, but again, it very much depends on where they're situated and whether or not the market exists for the glass that they are producing. Just finally, and it's a related issue, and that is who owns and operates the MRFs. And as you can see, the private sector is basically the main player, both in ownership and operation of facilities. About 70% of the facilities are owned and operated by the private sector. And why is that important? It's important because they are looking at the bottom line. And with the volatility in markets, not only just glass, but paper, the national sword, the loss of the Chinese market, it causes them great stress. And what's happening? They're choosing, let's say, not to renew contracts. It's not a profit. If they don't perceive it as a profit center, and this is problematic. So they'll walk away from a contract, or they will choose not to renew. They obviously will share the risk of market volatility, implementing processing fees, and other ways in which market risks are shared. This is in a situation where it's a change, where before the locality was receiving a revenue and now is having to pay. This can cause budgetary issues for the locality. Sharing in the burden of customer education, big time in Florida, especially where they're newly implemented single stream programs. If in doubt, throw it out, is really these consumer education programs that some of the private firms are trying to really instill in terms of trying to limit the amount of materials that are coming into a single stream MRF that don't belong there. And as we said, rethinking service levels, reducing the types of materials, imposing additional costs, moving from weekly to biweekly, various ways that they're trying to save money. And in the most extreme sense, you see consolidation or companies that, for instance, the Recommunity purchased by Republic. Recommunity was an independent operator, private firm, owned and operated or operating under contract with localities. Without simply just on the MRF operation, they couldn't survive. The profits weren't there for them as the market started to collapse. They were bought by Republic. Republic has a broad range of other types of activities, i.e., collection, landfills, etc. They can spread their costs. It's a more integrated company. But that does have this situation with the market volatility and market issues will impact or are impacting the smaller, more regional private firms that for various reasons don't see this as a profitable enterprise anymore.
Eileen, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up.
I'm wrapping up. My last slide.
Oh,
so
great.
What are some questions for the future? The issue with is technology outstripping economic feasibility. I mean, the technology is there to increase quality. The quality, in some cases, the quality requirements are very high. But is the market there to support the high quality and the type of technology that's possible for a MRF? If we go to a wet-dry system in terms of collection, we're getting into greater issues of less separation, requiring much more sorting. But what is the issue with the markets? So I'm just going to leave with a challenge of the markets currently, and I think the rest of the speakers are going to talk much more specifically about that. Yep. So thank you very
Eileen,
much.
I'm going to ask you to answer two questions. They've been
Sure.
coming in.
Sure.
Do you know where in the country the 20% of MRFs that aren't taking glass curbside anymore, where they are located?
So a bunch of them are in the west, in like the southwest. where they've dropped glass collection. But what I can do, I'm happy to put a list out of the no glass systems. Certainly, and also out in Oregon, they've always had a separated glass collection where there's a separate sleeve in the collection box. So the glass is collected, but it's separated.
And then one last question, have the number of facilities in the Northeast increased, decreased, or roughly remain the same?
I'd say they're pretty much remaining the same. I would say, you know, again, I can look at that. I didn't put that slide in terms of numbers, but I'm happy to look at that. I mean, I'm happy to give you the exact answer.
Sure.
So I'll send that out. But I would say that it's been pretty stable.
Thank you, Eileen.
Okay.
So next we are going to hear from Ellen Martin of Closed Loop Fund. And Ellen, I have shared my screen with you, and I can see your presentation now. And just mute you. There you go. Ellen,
okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Awesome. That was great, Eileen. Thank you for that lead in into this work. So I'm speaking primarily today about findings from a study that we did and released at the beginning of 2017, actually through Closed Loop Foundation. The work that Closed Loop Fund does, for those who are not as familiar, is really investing in strengthening domestic infrastructure for recycling in North America. And that includes everything from collections and sortation on the single stream side to processing and end uses for a variety of materials. We really focus primarily on the packaging commodities that you'd find in a curbside program. We undertook this study really to have a better handle on the economics for the system. And key to that piece is really understanding how can we make MRFs succeed with a wide range of materials and a variety of end markets. So the question we asked from the research perspective is really, how is there a productive and cost-effective way that we can increase recycling of glass at the MRF, recognizing that a MRF is looking at glass among many other materials coming in the single stream, and also recognizing that the end markets for glass in many parts of the country are there aren't a lot of options, as Eileen has pointed out. So I will just note that what I'm sharing is really work that was done by actually by Herb primarily prior to his work with Aero, and it was done, you know, mostly in 2016, and our world also, as Eileen has pointed out, has changed quite a bit. But I think some of the lessons here are still clear. So if we look just starting with generation of glass and how much material we're talking about on a national scale, the recycling rate for glass is not great, and I believe the latest numbers are even worse, where you have 9 million tons or so generated each year, and under a third of that actually gets recovered and recycled. And the challenge there is that it's a material that should be able to be recycled, especially if you're looking at the container stream. And the costs for that we've highlighted.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? There's a
Sure.
Skype box open on your screen. Could you just
so
push it to the side?
For
Thank
sure.
you.
Apologize for that. Can you see that now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Great. So the costs, obviously, we've talked about costs to the MRF. It's heavy material, there are transportation costs there, but also to the municipalities that, as Eileen was talking about, really speaks to the processing costs and disposal cost if it's going to alternative daily cover back in the landfill. in our estimation, the financial costs of the system at a national scale are really at the scale of $150 million a year. And we suspect that that number has only gotten worse in the last recent history. So what can we do to improve glass cleanup? So if we said at the MRF level that really, a typical disposal cost might be $35 a ton, which is a discount, right, on your national average. In the Northeast, I know that those numbers can be even higher. And instead said for, kind of mid-sized MRF that there is a cleanup system that you could install. Technology exists with some capital investment. And the right kind of design of a system that integrates with the rest of your operations, that you could do a good job of removing glass and actually getting it to a quality where it has more value in the market. The results essentially say that we found is that in this kind of scenario, you could expect to save as much as $25 a ton, which means you get a higher yield, a higher value quality of glass cullet. You also have the benefit of capturing more marketable non-glass commodity, and then you see fewer fines and less residue. That in turn actually has benefit also to the system. So that material can lead to more energy savings and greenhouse gas reductions at the processor and at the manufacturer, and less contamination for them to deal with. Ultimately, we don't want residue or garbage getting trucked around from one stop to the next throughout the system. That higher quality material then out of the processor has more opportunities for end markets for a variety of different uses. And here it's important to say, as Eileen pointed out, it's not just about a bottler, but or even about a bottle and fiberglass, but there are other end markets of value out there that MRFs can benefit from. And in the end, more glass is recycled. Now, this is the ideal, and I will say that we have a lot to do for the MRF and even beyond to make sure that that can happen. And if we did that, we would see the benefit. If that investment was made at the MRF level, you could see that kind of overall benefit flow throughout the system. And we have seen this happen. So aside from this research, the fund invested in Momentum Glass in Denver, which Eileen mentioned. That facility is a processor that actually pays for glass from 2 MRFs in the Denver area, and generates a high quality cullet. Most of it is going into bottles, but then it also has access to abrasives and fiberglass customers as well. Because those MRFs are getting value for their glass, they have invested in their own glass cleanup systems, not unlike what we're looking at here. And they're getting yields that are helping to make Momentum have a better business model, but also it's better for the MRFs too. So it's a success story that we like to talk about, even in this time where it is quite a challenge, and we would love to see more of this happen elsewhere in the country. So this is a specific example, actually, of a MRF in the Northeast, and I think, Herb, if you don't mind, I would love to have you jump in and tell the story of this specific MRF just on this page and the next, and then we can kind of get back into the calculator.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So in this example here, this is typical of what a lot of you are realizing out there now. You have a commodity with a negative value. What can I do with it? And in these discussions, you always got to start at the destination. What do I have available to me as far as markets? And then you go out to have a conversation, visit that market, and see what they're offering as far as the solutions for you, specifically what is the spec and what are the economics. And keep in mind that, you know, this wasn't the case a few years ago. Today, the technology exists where you can clean the glass up to where you can get into any of the markets that exist today out there, whether it be a pace or a momentum, whatever it is. So in this case right here, this particular MRF operator did his research, went out into the marketplace and said that identified that there was a market available to him, and with a capital investment, he could significantly improve the economics of his glass. He made the investment in the system that you see here, and they're all pretty similar. It's screening and contaminant removal. And after installation, they were able to realize a positive improvement in that commodity to where it not only paid for the investment, but gave them a significant return and also gave them a more sustainable, longer-term market that they didn't have before. And depending on the yield out of the glass stream, you even have a financial benefit of a lot of the commodity that you're losing in the glass can go back into the system, and you realize the benefit of whatever the current market value is on that commodity. And that system is in place today and still working. And it is, to a degree, it's generic. This same example, this same scenario could apply to most everyone out there, depending on the distance and the value that your market is offering you. But it's a simple mathematical calculation to determine whether that investment is worthwhile, whether you're going to get a return on it.
Yeah, that's great. And what Herb is pointing out is really these kind of key drivers that we looked at so that we could say, okay, we have these case examples that we can point out, but a MRF is going to say, yeah, but my situation is different. And so we wanted to provide some additional, like a framework that basically any MRF could sit down and look at it for their own market, looking at the volumes, looking at the current operations and what this would mean in terms of how the system fits within the overall, looking at the end markets, the transportation, the financing terms. I think one thing to note here, so we did an economic analysis with this case example. Back in late 2016 and early 2017, when we were doing this research, we were using Strategic's pricing matrix as a way to understand the revenue opportunity for a MRF. That is not the case today, as we have learned from the current reality. But I think what Herb is indicating is that the alternative options in terms of markets have actually come along farther in the last year and a half than what they were before as well. So there is, we think, a continued opportunity here to generate savings and even revenues. So I wasn't going to go through the detailed calculations. Obviously, if you're going to download the presentation later on, you'll see that and can go through in greater detail. The real message here, be above and beyond just the fact that this technology exists and you could get it at the MRF, is that it's not an issue of just the equipment alone. So, we do have to see municipalities and MRFs continue to accept glass. We have to resist the temptation to have glass taken out of the programs. And we believe that there are ways that operators can continue to succeed and survive and navigate the current situation with glass in the single stream. It does mean that the parties involved have to be clear and fair about the contracts that they're engaging in, and recognize that there are there is volatility and talk about how to deal with that. But there is also a need and opportunity with the end markets to pay for the higher quality cullet, and we see that happening and possible in other markets. It's just not necessarily the prevailing narrative or reality for many out there today. So we need to change that. You know, that I think is something that Closed Loop certainly thinks about as we think about the way that we can help support infrastructure in the long term. For those of you out there who are interested in sort of playing out the numbers for yourself, there is a calculator that we developed. If you go to our website, closedlooppartners.com/glass-study/, you can do that yourself. We're happy to also, you know, work with you on that if that's of interest to you all. And with that, I will end there and turn it back over to Marianne. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer it or ask Herb to answer them. Hello? Hello?
You there, Marianne?
Herb and I are here.
Looks like we lost Marianne.
Oh, we did. I see that that Marianne's line is not on. Maybe it looks like she's self-muted. Well, this is very interesting. Herb, is there anything that I didn't cover that while we're waiting for Marianne to get back on that you would just add to this conversation, especially about the current market?
Yeah, my advice to everyone out there, what has occurred in the Northeast up in Mass with Ardagh, it's unique, but the model itself still works. It's just whether it'll work for you financially. So you need to do your homework and see what markets, what outlets are available to you, and then I would strongly urge everyone to go visit with that market and talk to them about what their spec is and look at the actual material that they're receiving. And like I say, today the technology, the equipment exists where you can make the spec for all the facilities out there, regardless of who they are. And then it's just a matter of using something like this calculator right here to see whether it makes economic sense for you and whether it's worth the investment. But it's not a difficult analysis. It's pretty black and white, and you may be able to improve your situation and justify the investment.
This is Marianne. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep, we got you.
Wonderful. I don't know what happened there, but I was about to say there was a question that came in that I did want to just read. The person's asking, they're curious about the kind of equipment that MRFs are getting payback have. They're on the board of a small MRF and have a glass breaker and air knife, and it still deal with heavy contamination. Can you talk a little bit more about what other types of equipment that might be needed to clean up that glass further?
Yep. So Herb, I have these two slides here. If you want to talk to either of them, just let me know.
Okay. So what has occurred here, these two pictures, these two systems, it's additional processing equipment, additional sorting and separation that's been added to the end of the MRF. You know, back when we were running these plants years ago, a lot of this equipment didn't exist, and we were just using you know, an air knife or some other simple piece of equipment. But what it boils down to is additional screening And in the top picture here, that is a vibratory deck. And then and in the bottom one, it's a trauma screen. And then it is additional air separation. The one up top is a zigzag air separator. And then the other one is individual vacuums on the different fractions that are being separated out of the trauma screen. But this is the additional equipment that you would need to bring the quality up to meet the spec of these different processing facilities.
Okay. And I will just add that, sorry, just really quick, that I have heard that for some smaller partners that Strategic has, advised on lesser equipment that they feel like can get glass to a state where they can take it with less investment, but that's, it hasn't been necessarily something that they're doing across the board.
Another option that I've encountered too is facilities that remove the glass at the very start of the process rather than trying to clean it up after it's gone through the whole system. But in the interest in the interest of time, I'm going to move ahead a little bit, and I thank you, Ellen. And we're going to move on to Herb Northrup. And Herb, I've shared the screen with you.
Okay. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. This is Herb Northrup. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Aero Aggregates. And Aero Aggregates is North America's first vertically integrated manufacturer of foam glass aggregate. And, oops, sorry about that. Foamed glass aggregate is
your presentation is no longer on the screen.
Is it up there now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. Foam glass aggregate is a synthetic aggregate that's been in use in Europe for decades. We're the first guys to bring it to the U.S. for infrastructure products. And what it is it's made from 100% recycled glass that comes out of the MRF, and it goes through a pretty elaborate process that turns it into a very lightweight replacement for stone. Very lightweight, meaning that it's about 15% the weight of a traditional aggregate and anywhere from a third to a quarter of the weight of the other lightweight aggregate options that are out there. And, in a nutshell, these are the benefits of this material right here. It's made from 100% recycled glass. I don't care what the color of the cullet is. And it's a little more forgiving than the traditional glass sorting facilities that are out there. And it's a modular system so that as the business grows, I just add capacity to accommodate more glass. And you can see from the picture there, this is basically what happens. The mixed broken cullet that's coming out of MRFs turns into a stone, an aggregate, and it's a lot like pumice. It's a good analogy, and it has a lot of really neat technical engineering attributes, which is why it's been in use in Europe for decades and continues to grow every year. And it isn't a case of us reinventing the wheel. All we did was transplant it from Europe, and our main focus is on infrastructure projects. It's roads, it's bridges, it is foundations, but the material has a lot of other uses and applications due to its properties, such as its insulating properties. It's mandated in Germany to be used under slabs for construction because of its insulating potential. It's less expensive than the other options that are out there, and it can be applied and used in the existing infrastructure and construction industry that's out there today. We're not asking any of the users to change the method with which they're designing and building these different infrastructure projects. You can see on the picture there on the left, that is right at the entrance to the bridge over the Secaucus River up in Kearney, New Jersey. And like all the other projects, we were able to save the customer there a significant sum by using this product. And there's a significant environmental benefit. At the end of the day, we have our carbon footprint is half of what the other alternatives are out there. You know, one of the reasons is because it's so light. Instead of taking a dump truck to the construction site and you've got, you know, 15, 20 cubic yards, we're loading up 100 cubic yard walking floor trailers because this material is so light. And as far as policy is concerned, it's attractive to regulators because it lends itself to the goals that they're all striving for. We're giving it a use for all the recycled glass, of which there is not enough markets today. It is a reduced carbon footprint where we are diverting recycling significant volumes, and because the material really has its benefits because it's so light, and so it has its greatest value in areas where there's soft soils. That's where it lends itself to these resiliency projects. Anywhere where you're close to water, you're probably going to have softer soils, and this is an ideal candidate to address the issues that you have close to water. And I think we're in use and approved already in 7 states, and that increases every month. And the other neat aspect of this is that for the first time ever, that we're able to offer a service and a market to a customer where it's truly a circular economy scenario. The material is generated in the community, it's collected, processed, comes to us, and we're able to return that product into the marketplace. So it's truly a closed loop, and for the first time in my career in recycling, I'm able to have a discussion about a green product, and I'm saving you money, and that's a good conversation to have. There's a picture of our facility. We're located just south of Philadelphia in Eddystone, PA, and it is the operation itself is not offensive. If you look at that picture there, we have a elementary school that is just adjacent to the property, and we started production a year ago in May, and we're already in the process of doubling our capacity, talking about tripling it, and we're in active discussions with a lot of different locations around the country about siting facilities, just because we've had a very positive reception out there it starts with the engineering construction community and the departments of transportation. That's what's really driving it. And when you consider that it's been in use in Europe for 25 years and it has grown every year, we think that there's a lot of potential with this material. And we all know that I'm probably not going to have an issue with feedstock for some time. So we think that there's a lot of opportunity associated with this business model and this product.
Herb, can I ask what's in your aggregate besides the ground up glass?
There's 2 raw materials that go into this process, and it is the aggregate, and it's a recycled mineral. And the recycled mineral is used as a foaming agent, and that bonds with, well, it reacts with the glass to create the bubbles. It creates an oxygen bubble. So at the end of the process, which is a thermal process, the glass gets ground down into a powder, and then it gets mixed with this mineral, gets delivered to the kiln, and the thermal process then, with the reaction of the foaming agent with the glass, it's like baking a cake. It just rises up into a higher pumice-like material. So it's just two raw materials in the entire process.
how clean does the glass have to be when you receive it in order to use it?
My quality spec is the same as the SMIs and the Pace and the Momentums and all those other guys out there. In fact, just because of the nature of the process, I can take a little bit, I have a little bit more tolerance on the CSP side, the ceramic, stone, and porcelain. But like anybody out there, I want to source as clean a material as I can. But we have the, millions of dollars of equipment in here to make sure that we're making a acceptable, clean feedstock raw material for this process. So I'm no different than anybody else.
So are you planning on being able to ship your material to other states that you're presently not operating in?
I guess you're talking about the finished product?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We have quoted Vancouver, British Columbia. We have a job we're doing next year in Port Charles, down in Texas. We'll go as far as is economically, valuable to the customer. But I think it's just like anything. I think the way this is all going to go is you'll end up with regional facilities to accommodate the markets. But today we're shipping, quite a distance.
Sure. And I should tell you a number of the comments and questions are people want you in their state. So the demand is absolutely present.
Yeah, not surprising.
Okay. And can you use any other glass besides containers, like CRT glass?
No, the process is set up exclusively for container glass. You don't want to go. You can use plate, but the system and the chemistry of it is set up for container glass. No, not CRT. I wouldn't take that.
And do you now, or will you in the future be making anything besides aggregate? Will you be making, let's say, insulation panels or any other type of product?
The answer is yes. And as you can imagine, something with this type of property would have a lot of potential uses. We're in the process right now of qualifying, what direction we want to go. But the foam glass has been made into pipe insulation, rigid pipe insulation. In Europe, they use foam glass aggregate and concrete. There's a lot of different applications for it. We're researching remediation now, and it's used in green roofs. There's a lot of different applications and products that can be made from this base material.
Okay. Thank you, Herb. It was very interesting, and there's a lot of questions, and I just want to mention at this time, while I'm passing the screen over to Brooke Nash, that whatever questions do not get answered during the webinar, our speakers have agreed to answer them, and we'll get them out to everyone. Okay, so now we have Brooke Nash, and Brooke, I can see your screen. You're good to go.
Al?
Brooke? Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I know people have been on the phone and on the screen for a while, so I'm going to try and go quickly through these slides. I'm Brooke Nash. I head up the Municipal Waste Reduction Branch here at Mass DEP and work with cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth. Just big picture quickly, we're a state with 8 MRFs, 1 state-owned, 7 private, and all but 2 of those are single-stream MRFs. We also are a container deposit law state that's been in effect since 1983. We're also a waste ban state. We ban a number of materials from disposal, including glass, food, and beverage containers, and that particular waste ban dates back to 1994. In terms of how much glass we are currently recovering, I pulled this number from a study done in, came out in April 2017. It was done by DSM Environmental Associates for the American Beverage Association and Mass Beverage Association. You can see the split. I mean, it's roughly 50-50 in terms of recovery of glass, deposit container glass versus all other glass, which would be glass going to MRFs and being source separated at municipal transfer stations. So when I was thinking about what to call this slide, sorry I couldn't help myself. The glass market meltdown is what I'm calling it. We heard in mid-January that, of course, most of us know this, that Ardagh Group was closing its plant in Milford, Massachusetts. We've been fortunate to be home to a container glass manufacturing plant for many years, manufactured beer bottles, and this plant was a particularly high consumer of cullet. I heard a glass industry executive say that this particular plant was the highest user of glass cullet percentage-wise in their process in the country, just to give you a feel for the impact. And the cullet that was provided to this facility was supplied by Strategic Materials, so in Franklin, Massachusetts, just a couple of towns over. So we had a great local market. We've heard from a couple speakers how markets for glass are regional. Well, that all went belly up. With the announcement of this plant closing, Strategic Materials quickly followed suit. They stopped accepting all except the deposit container glass by mid-February. They had been taking both from our MRFs as well as from municipal transfer stations in the central and eastern part of the state. So we had a real domino effect, and our phones started ringing off the hook. What to do with glass. So we have been looking at alternative markets. You know, we know that obviously MassDEP is not going to solve for the issues with the glass container market. That's a much bigger nut to crack. And so instead we've been focusing on alternatives, one of which has been process glass aggregate. I've been sort of on a steep learning curve about PGA for short. We think that there is potential for communities that collect recyclables, particularly at transfer stations, to manage their glass in-house, sort of the ultimate circular economy, as Herb mentioned. We are a state we have about 150 municipal transfer stations, and then the other 150 communities operate curbside programs. Obviously, the 150 with transfer stations tend to be smaller communities, lower population, and most are still source separating glass from other containers. So we have also looked at the private sector at aggregate operations. We think that there's some potential there for these folks to get into the business. We have one private operator who started up and is now accepting glass from MRFs and municipalities directly in response to the shutdown of the Ardagh facility. And we are talking with other aggregate producers as well. And then we've also had conversations with several other private sector folks, including Herb. And I'll just make a shout out to Herb. If you're listening, we would welcome you with open arms in Massachusetts. Needless to say, we are very interested in trying to grow this market, both at the really local, decentralized level, as well as trying to support some larger solutions to be able to handle the material that's coming out of MRFs. And I also will say that our MRFs are working hard to find alternative markets. But I won't elaborate on that right now. So process glass aggregate, what we've learned is mostly come from our friends in New Hampshire, specifically the Northeast Resource Recovery Association. They're a nonprofit that serves several hundred municipalities, and one of their main services is providing a cooperative materials marketing program. But they also got into the process glass aggregate business about 10 years ago. They have 5 municipal sites that aggregate material from surrounding communities, and then they contract with an equipment operator that brings in a mobile crusher about once a year to each one of these sites and grinds through 800 to 1,000 tons of container glass at a time and leaves a pile of of glass aggregate. I actually was up at the site in New London, New Hampshire a couple weeks ago, and can testify it's beautiful stuff. One of the reasons we decided to sort of jump on this as a possibility is that we think there's a relatively low cost of entry, that quick startup is possible. We're not talking about huge capital costs. The permitting from SDEP's standpoint is pretty straightforward, and for local communities. We also have a universal beneficial use determination for glass. That's actually dates back to 1994. So for mixed colored broken glass that is screened to a 3/8 inch minus, any operator, any community can use that. There's approved uses include subgrade construction applications, subsoil drainage systems, substitute for conventional aggregate and asphalt or concrete, and then alternative daily cover at landfills when it's mixed with soil, so it does not require any kind of notification. So we have that in place. We also, our Department of Transportation has a specification that allows for substitution of processed glass aggregate up to 10% for a variety of materials, including crushed stone, gravel, sand, and burrow. So we have these sort of basic policies in place, but not much has happened since 1994 in terms of using this material. So we're trying to change that. What we've identified as some of the historical barriers to increasing the use of PGA were a volume and consistent supply of the material, and then of course the fear factor, resistance to change. We've all heard of sort of the driving on glass, shredded tires and glass salt. Why would anybody do that? So we do have a challenge ahead of us. Basically, that's what we are working on now, is trying to build acceptance of the concept of using processed glass aggregate, and we think the first group of folks we need to work with are our local public works officials and highway departments. We went ahead and held a webinar in February. There's a link to that webinar here to talk to folks about processed glass aggregate, and it featured a presentation by NRRA and their regional program. The best, the most important sort of compelling testimonial came from the public works director from a town called New London, New Hampshire. Richard Lee there has been using PGA in municipal projects for decades, everything from sidewalks to parking lots, drainage, road base. He's used it for federally funded projects. He's provided it to private construction companies, to a local college. So he sort of scratches his head and doesn't understand why everybody else is so reluctant to put a toe in the water. So we're hoping to recruit more folks and bring them, enlighten them the way that the folks in New London, New Hampshire have been. So to entice communities, we are offering a new grant. I have another slide coming up about that, but a grant to try and help them get started if they want to. We're also developing a fact sheet. It should be out actually within the next few days. Again, providing just the information and answers to the typical questions we get. Who's used it, who's approved it, has it been tested, what do the research labs say? And we've also met recently with our Department of Transportation. A couple staff people from here went out to their testing lab to talk to them about PGA, and they have agreed to do a demonstration project. So we're working on sourcing material for them. So we hope to have a demonstration project soon by our Department of Transportation. We've had a pretty encouraging response from some of our DPW directors. We had about 60 folks on this webinar back in February, and that then spurred a lot of calls. And so we are encouraging folks that want to do it on a local level to think about opening their transfer station to other communities and creating a regional site for glass. Some are open to that. So we will see when our grant application closes in June what we get. In the meantime, where supply has been going, it's been kind of rough waters here. There's been some stockpiling at transfer stations. We did actually modify our rules to allow more leniency and allow communities to stockpile it. communities that have collected glass, they really don't want to throw it away. Nobody wants to throw it away. So some actually have taken advantage, some municipalities, of the sites in New Hampshire. Keene, New Hampshire is just over the border from Massachusetts, so there are some communities that are self-hauling their source-separated glass from their transfer stations up to Keene. There has been some disposal. To dispose of glass in state in Massachusetts, it does require a waste ban waiver from Mass DEP, and we have received requests for waivers and granted them. Roughly 4,500 tons of glass have been disposed, and that's over the last 2.5 months. We think that's going to be about half of that going forward. That's both MRF glass, primarily MRF glass coming out of our MRFs, but also some loads from transfer stations where it's been source separated. And the material is going, as it has been, but probably more of it now, going to daily cover, mostly out of state. We do have one private operator that is now processing, accepting glass, post-consumer glass from MRFs and municipalities. We were able to do a pretty quick modification to their operating permit to allow that to happen. But the overall big picture and sort of what everybody's focused on is the cost. We're seeing the cost of tipping the processing cost for glass at $40 to $80 per ton. These are the alternative markets I'm talking about, and that does not include transportation. So sending it to either the private site or to an off-site or an out-of-state site for converting to processed glass aggregate. And of course, when it's coming out the back end of the MRF and going for disposal, our disposal fees are high, probably $70 to $80 a ton. So this has prompted, a number of folks in the recycling community here to start wondering whether glass does still belong in the curbside recycling stream. I've heard of one community that was offered a price differential, significantly lower price for their material, their single stream material, if glass were not included. I don't know if that's a sign of things to come, but it certainly is foremost in people's minds. The crisis with glass, coming right, basically coinciding with the impacts of China's national sword, sort of couldn't come at a worse time. So we've got very, very high cost for recycling. The price in Massachusetts, I was sort of salivating at the slide that Eileen showed, about $35 to $40 a ton for a sort of a typical, and I realize that's a national average processing fee of $40. Here in Massachusetts, I would say that starts at $70 to $75. There are communities that are paying $100, over $100 a ton. Again, bear in mind that the glass has had a major impact on that, because we're talking, of course, 15 to 20% of a MRF's throughput is that glass, and it's going out at a very high cost. And let's see, I've got a couple more slides. Our market development grants, again, we're offering up to $150,000 for municipalities that want to try and get into the PGA business, and we are encouraging regional sites. And then for the private sector, I think Eileen mentioned that we've been offering grants for several years now. It's our Recycling Business Development Grant. This is for private entities, and there are a number of target materials in this grant, but glass is one of them, obviously. These are grants for up to $400,000, and we funded one MRF retrofit for glass specifically in our last round. I believe it was our last round of these grants. This is an annual application. We are certainly talking with a number of operators, both MRFs as well as aggregate operations, to let them know about the availability of these funds, and hoping to see a good response. Both of these application periods close in June. There should be a second application period in September. And Mary Ann, you're probably telling me it's time to wrap up here?
Yeah, it could be another minute.
Okay, and just lastly, we're also working very hard with communities to, on the ground, real boots on the ground effort through our Recycling IQ kit, IQ standing for increased quality, to clean up recycling at the curb. And I've got a couple of links in here for that, and I will leave it there. In the meantime, we're sort of hanging onto our hats and hoping that Herb or somebody else will cite a facility in Massachusetts. Thank you all.
Well, Brooke, how does the bottle bill affect glass markets, specifically in your state?
Well, the bottle bill material is the material that everybody wants. So that material is still moving. That's the clean material. And so that sort of leaves the rest of the material is kind of the the neglected stream. So it's a good question. I mean, are we better off with a bottle bill? I would submit certainly we are, because we know that bottle deposit materials are diverted at roughly twice the rate that non-bottle deposit containers are, whether it's glass or plastic. So, but it means that the consumers can be selective, can be choosy, and they'll choose the cleaner deposit glass over the MRF glass, and even over the source separated at transfer stations.
Do you see an increase in communities that are starting to separate the glass out by, say, having a drop-off location where the glass can be separated from the single stream?
We have not seen any curbside communities go to a glass only a drop-off. A number have talked about it. We have seen some drop-off communities that had single stream collection go back to a 3-stream collection, so pull out the glass and keep that separately, actually 2-stream, and a couple that going to 3-stream, trying to keep fiber separate from plastic and metal containers, and then a glass collection. But no major changes yet.
And then we have a question for Herb. Has silicosis been identified as a production hazard for you all?
No, and the reason for that is that all container glass is amorphous glass. It's not amorphous silica. It's not crystalline silica. In fact, we looked into that before we brought the technology over from Europe, and then did a lot of testing here with the state of Pennsylvania. In fact, I can tell you that you have more risk walking on the beach for crystalline silica than you do walking through our plant. No, not an issue. Container glass is amorphous.
And Brooke, can you speak to why glass, there's a beneficial use determination for glass? What makes it exempt, from other regulations if it's covered under this BUD?
I am not sure I understand the question. I know that in order to create the beneficial use determination for any product, we look at a set of criteria and what the end use will be. Of course, it has to be source separated. When we created the BUD, and I don't work in our regulatory unit, so I'm probably going to defer, and I can provide a contact person, but it was determined back in 1994 that beneficial use of glass was a good idea, because it provided an alternative to glass recycling. I wish I could say more about that, about the process.
Another question is, someone wants to know what you panelists think about the idea of going back to dual stream collection instead of single stream.
I would pose that question to the MRFs, because the MRFs have invested a lot of money in building the facilities, and so in the Northeast, at least, or in Massachusetts, I would pose that question to the MRF operators.
Do you know if the MRFs have to pay to send glass to be used for alternative daily cover?
So this is Ellen. My understanding is that forms the basis of our study. That in general you're getting a discounted tip fee for that material because it's. I guess you could count that as paying, but you're getting paid for it, but you're still paying the landfill.
Can you hear me? This is Eileen. Can you hear me? Because my phone went dead, so I'm on the computer.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. So, and in some cases where you've got co-location or close location with the landfill, or if it's a both public, then it's a zero tip fee. So it's either discounted or in some cases zero for the ADC,
Okay.
alternative daily cover.
So another question about PGA is, other than size, what other criteria is necessary to meet Massachusetts requirements?
Okay, I can answer that. So there is a limit of 5% by volume residual content. So that would be food, paper, et cetera. I mentioned it has to be screened to 3/8 inch minus, and it's only food or beverage containers, so not glass window panes or ceramics. But that's it. And I can add that it does not require prior approval. We ask that the user notify us, but they don't require prior approval.
Okay. Herb, there's some more questions for you. What are the physical properties of your foam aggregate as far as strength goes for construction purposes?
Well, in general, it's over the bulk density is 15, 16 pounds per cubic foot, and the compressive strength is over 15,000. But if there's engineers out there, someone who's really interested, I'd advise you to go to the website and get it there, or contact our technical director, Teresa Laux. You can find her information on our website as well.
And have you done any AASHTO hardness or sound testing on the foam aggregate?
Oh yeah, there's binders and binders full of tests that have been done, which was necessary because we're introducing something into North America, into the States here that's never been seen before, and we knew that going in, so we made a significant investment on the testing up front. And our CEO and Teresa both are PEs and have PhDs in civil engineering, so we can answer all those questions for you.
So if someone was interested in having Aero Aggregates come into their community, would a good first step be to try and work with the DOT to get them interested in your product?
Probably the first step would be for them to contact us, and we get an understanding of the marketplace, but I mean, not short after that, we got to bring the DOT into the conversation. I don't see, and we haven't seen any problem with getting the material approved and accepted, but you want to have that conversation up front because the DOTs are managing a lot of these larger infrastructure projects, and that's where a good chunk of the material can go.
So one of the things, I'm actually going to change the screen to my screen for a moment. If I can get all these boxes out of the way. Because I want to make sure that all of you are aware of the Glass Recycling Coalition. NERC is an advisory member of the coalition, and right now the GRC is conducting a survey, and it's a survey that they do annually to gather information about glass recycling practices and perspectives. So they are inviting you, if you are a MRF operator, glass processor, manufacturer, a brand using glass, or a public sector recycling organization, to fill out the survey. I have the link here. I'm going to leave this up while we continue our last few minutes of discussion, but I wanted to make sure you are all aware of it, because the survey results are shared broadly on the GRC website. So this is something you can access afterwards. And I guess we have just a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask each of the speakers if there was something, any last thoughts you want to leave with the audience. So Eileen, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. So, yeah, I think a couple of things I wanted to just say. I think that the issue, you know, with respect to maintaining glass in the program, it's very important. It's very important to try to keep the glass in the program. We saw even in New York City when some years ago when they dropped certain materials, A, there was such an outcry on the part of the public, and B, then to restart, because it did come back, it took a long time and it took a lot of re-education. The best is really to try to keep the material in as opposed to dropping it out. It is interesting that in some cases, especially in, I believe it's Oregon, you know, where they have this separate sleeve, but that's, you know, but that really was from its inception. So that's probably not feasible for a lot of localities. In some cases in Kansas City, for instance, the Ripple Glass, they assisted localities in setting up separate glass collection sites, which they service themselves. So potentially another option is to work, if there is a potential market that's looking for clean materials, they can sometimes be of assistance. I believe Momentum might have done that as well in Salt Lake City, as well. So I mean, that is another option, but I would say that to try to look at some of these markets, even if they're sort of more difficult or down markets like sandblasting or abrasive, which isn't quite as high an end as bottle to bottle, would be really probably the first option. I would say the last resort is to drop.
Yeah, and I just want to build on something you had mentioned too. I mean, there are I want to say Herb touched on it earlier, is that there are environmental reasons that we use recycled glass instead of virgin, and it's the energy savings as well as the reduced greenhouse gases. This is something that the fiberglass manufacturers as well as the glass bottle manufacturers have said is the advantage of using recycled content glass in their product lines. And Herb had said it too. His is for a different reason, but it's more on the transportation side, where transportation may be an issue for the glass bottle manufacturers as well, but it's more in the production of their products where they see the savings. So let me ask Ellen if you have any last thoughts.
Thanks. This has been a great conversation. So thanks, Marianne, for getting us all together for this. I think the thing that strikes me about it is that ironically, glass is, you know, an area where it's all a domestic market. And we talk about the context of National Sword and all this export stuff going on. And we're sitting here with, you know, an infrastructure that inherently has to be domestic for glass. And I see it as an opportunity. So, you know, clearly there is a need and interest in the alternative end markets like Aero Aggregates, which, you know, if we haven't mentioned it before, Closed Loop Fund is an investor in Aero as well. That, you know, in order for this to actually become a reality, is that you have to have this connection of the public sector and the private sector committed to working together in different markets in order to make from my perspective, the impact happen. And it is capital that I think will come flowing when that partnership exists. So I see that as a real opportunity and, kind of a positive message to send around glass. I think that, I think glass is due for a bit of disruption, to be honest, and I hope that we see that in the coming months and years.
Okay. And Herb, how about you?
I think I would reinforce what they both said. One, take a hard, long look and be cautious about jumping to conclusions and just pulling glass out right away. Take a longer term look, because at the end of the day, if you're going into a bottle, glass is infinitely recyclable. Hey, there's a blip on the radar here in Massachusetts because of a business decision, but it works from a technical manufacturing standpoint and a recycling perspective. And like Ellen says, that here's the first time where we can impact our destiny and our programs by putting pressure on the policymakers to say, you know what, mandate recycled content. In the case of departments of transportation, here's a product that not only is it 100% recycled content, but it helps with the sustainability of these programs. Oh, and by the way, at the end of the day, I save you money. So, don't jump to a knee-jerk reaction and just say, oh my gosh, I got to get rid of this because I've been through this before. It's so difficult to add and subtract commodities from residential recycling programs. And if the economic value and obviously the environmental value is there, the funding and the solution will come your way. It'll get put into place.
Okay, thank you, Herb. And how about you, Brooke? You have our last minute.
Okay, well, I will agree with what's been said. I don't think we should make any rash decisions about taking glass out of the system. We know that that'll not do anything to maintain the trust of the public, and it's much easier said than done. I think this is a critical issue that needs to be solved with really close collaboration between the private and public sector interests. I think there's some very interesting policy questions on the table, one of which Herb mentioned, minimum content. That could be minimum content of recycled glass in containers, a la California. Could be minimum content in road building specifications. I can't also help but think there are some states that have deposits on wine bottles. Should that be part of the discussion? So I think there are a number of issues that we need to look at and that we need to work collaboratively to solve this problem.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for participating in the webinar today. Our speakers have been extremely generous in just in their time and in sharing their perspectives. And I thank all of our presenters, and I thank you out there who have been listening for the last hour and a half. And we will be making the recording from today's webinar and the presentations available on our website, and you will receive the links to those in a follow-up email that you'll receive tomorrow. But I thank you all. Oh, and the questions that were not asked today will be answered by our speakers, and those that pose those questions will get those responses directly sent to them. I thank you all and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.